Welcome to the Fund2000.com Real Estate Podcast. My name is Chuck Ham, and today we're going to talk about a change in how we show property as realtors. And this is for residential property. Welcome. Thanks for coming back to the Fund2000.com Real Estate Podcast. Today we're going to discuss a big change in our industry for residential sales. For many years, you might have experienced, if you want to buy a house, that is, how easy it would be to go and see the property. You just contact the agent and say, I'd like to see a specific property. Maybe it's the listing agent, maybe it's your favorite real estate agent or any random agent, and they'd be willing to show it to you, usually no questions asked. They might ask questions. It was always a good practice to ask questions to the prospective buyer. You want to make sure you're not just showing the property to anybody, some unqualified buyer. That might just be a waste of the agent's time. But for the most part, agents did very minimal pre-screening and very minimal on the front end before showing property to a potential client. That's the reason why is because each person who wants to see property, we figure they're not going to waste their time, probably, and hopefully, and therefore hopefully they're not wasting our time. And we want new clients. So in the process of listing a property or taking calls from a potential new client, we try to do as much as possible to make it easy for new prospective clients to meet us and to see property, to get them pre-qualified. We try to do as much as possible to establish a relationship. And in order to establish a relationship, we need to meet them, and that was a good strategy, to just show the property that they want to see, no questions asked or very few questions asked. Often they would not even be pre-approved for a mortgage, but it would be an opportunity to establish a new relationship. That's the way I always looked at it. There were only a few instances here and there where maybe I would have done a little bit more on the pre-qualification stage. For example, if it's a very expensive property or if the showing instructions said only pre-qualified buyers, or I didn't have easy access to the property for whatever reason. That's all changing now. The main reason is because of a rule change that results from a lawsuit against the National Association of Realtors. Most people in the industry are already aware of it. This lawsuit, the National Association of Realtors and many of the big firms, I'm not sure which ones are the big firms, but I'm just going to name some of the big firms so you know what I'm talking about. I think Berkshire Hathaway or Coldwell Banker, Century 21, maybe Remax, they might have all been some of these firms that were involved in this lawsuit. And the basic idea is they were price fixing, and they're making it impossible through these MLS rules for buyers to be able to negotiate what the commission that would be paid to their own agent would be. We've already discussed that. I'm not going to get into all those issues. We do have some previous podcast episodes that if you go look at the episodes on this very same Fund2000.com Real Estate Podcast, you will find that we've talked about that a couple times. Now, the rule change that we're now agreeing to implement, it's already implemented. All realtors are now bound by this rule change. I don't like the rule. I don't think it really does what it's supposed to do. I don't think it really resolves the issue. I think the big firms and agents are still going to try to keep to make it appear that a buyer is obligated to pay 2.5%. And I think they're also going to make it appear to sellers that they are still obligated to pay 5 or 6% of the purchase price. That's the whole point here, is price fixing. As long as agents are not disclosing in a really upfront way that commissions are negotiable, I don't think the rule goes far enough. So, for example, if you're an attorney in California and you have a potential client and you're about to enter into not all kinds of agreements, but specific kinds of agreements, like I think it's a contingency fee agreement. State law requires that there be a disclosure that to the client, the prospective client that's about to sign an agreement, saying that they know that attorney's fees are negotiable. You don't have to, they're not set by law. You can tell the attorney you don't want to pay so much, and they can negotiate with you. So that is a disclosure that is required. Realtors don't have that yet. We do have the civil code that has a bunch of language about commissions, and I think verbiage like that is in there, but that's not happening here. What we have here is a rule change that requires that anytime a buyer wants to see a property, there has to be an agreement, written agreement between the prospective buyer and the agent who is showing the property. It doesn't matter if it's a listing agent or a buyer's agent. If you're an agent that is going to show property to somebody, anybody, you need to have an agreement with that person establishing your commission and also various other terms. So it's a buyer representation agreement. So commission is not the only term that's going to go on to this agreement. So that's the big change. If you want to see property, or if you're an agent that wants to show property, the MLS rules, if this property is listed on the MLS rules require that there be an agreement, written, signed agreement between whichever agent is showing the property and the person seeing the property. It's required that they have an agreement. And that's new. We haven't had that before. Before, you can just, like I said, go and contact the agent and make an appointment. There wouldn't be any kind of written agreement yet. That was a little bit too much, we thought, as agents to require that, and especially if we're trying to pick up new clients. Well, like I say, I don't think it's the best rule. I think it reinforces this problem that apparently the rule is trying to resolve, which is price fixing. I think the big firms are still going to try to do that. Regardless, let's talk about what we can do to get around that. So if you were to contact me or my firm or my agents to see a specific property, we would have to have you sign a buyer representation agreement. And that's going to be true for any agent now because of this MLS rule change, as long as it's listed on the MLS. Again, this doesn't apply to commercial properties. It's good practice still, so you still might have some agents requiring a buyer representation agreement before you go see commercial properties or other properties that are not on the MLS. It's always been good practice to have that agreement in place. So let's talk about negotiating the agreement. If you're an agent or if you are a buyer and you're considering this buyer representation agreement because you want to see property, you're not really sure if you're going to be a long-term looker, going to keep looking at additional properties. You were just curious about this one specific property. Let's talk about the terms that you can negotiate. First off, commission, it's negotiable. Like I said before, you don't have to pay 2.5%. You don't have to pay 3%. You don't have to pay 1%. You don't have to pay anything. On the other hand, what agent out there is going to work for free? So the agents are going to be put into a place now where they're going to have to decide something to propose to the buyer. What commission do they want to charge? And I think most are going to say 2.5%, 3%, something like that. I don't think they're really going to change their commission rate. It's possible, you never know, but I don't think commissions are going to go down because of this rule change. But the point here is you can negotiate this. Now, one of the differences here is, this is another part of the rule change, is the MLS used to show what the offered compensation was. And that was because the compensation was negotiated strictly between the seller and the listing agent at a very early stage. So before the house is even listed on the MLS, there would be an agreement between the firm, the real estate office, through their listing agent or broker, that the total compensation paid to real estate agents on both sides would be probably 5%. That was the issue here. That's why we got this rule change, is that if that 5% was getting negotiated way before the buyer could even participate in the commission negotiation process, then that was unfair to the buyer. So now we don't have that. So whereas before an agent would be able to get onto the MLS and see, okay, they're offering me 2.5% to show this property, now the agent doesn't have the offer of compensation. They don't know, there is no offer of compensation. They have to negotiate on your behalf for there to be any compensation if you are the buyer and the agent negotiating this. So it creates some negotiation, which is good with the seller. As a buyer, you don't have to pay your buyer agent any money out of pocket generally, but the buyer agent could decide, well, I'm not going to show this property unless you pay me out of pocket some certain amount of money. But that would be against our tradition. Traditionally, commissions are paid upon closing, and I think that's going to be the standard forever. I don't think that's going to change. Agents are willing to work for a little bit additional compensation on contingency that the sale close. There is really no good reason for that to change as far as I can tell. Now, when a buyer's agent contacts the seller, let's say you as a buyer want to make an offer on a property, they're going to have to ask for compensation from the seller, unless you as a buyer are going to pay that money out of pocket or out of your mortgage or something like that. So that is a difference here. Along with the offer, when you send in your offer, say I want to offer $1 million for this beautiful property, and I want to close in 30 days, and all the other terms that go on an offer. An additional term, it's going to be a separate agreement, but it's part of the same agreement that my agent is going to be paid 2.5% out of the seller proceeds, or 1% or 2%. Whatever the amount is, there's going to be a discussion about that now. And that discussion is likely going to be based on whatever discussion you already had when you saw the property the first time. So I hope that makes sense. So now let's just rewind a little bit. Let's say you are a buyer, you like a house, you contact an agent. The agent now has to get a buyer representation agreement. You have a quick discussion. The buyer agent is going to say, well, I can't show the property unless you sign this buyer representation agreement. I'm going to ask for this amount of compensation, 2.5%. The buyer representation agreement just says it doesn't matter who pays for it. It's just that you're going to get it, whatever that compensation is from whoever. So the buyer is going to be liable for that 2.5% if that's what you negotiate. Then you go see the property. Then you decide, ooh, I like this property. I'm going to make an offer. So you contact your agent. We're going to make an offer. And now that's when the buyer's agent is going to ask the seller to pay for that 2.5%. But there's a negotiation. The seller might say, no, I'm not paying 2.5. I don't have to. Whereas before they had to, because that was already negotiated. It was in the contract. It was already offered on the MLS. That's no longer the case. So when you write your offer, you're going to be asking for your agent to be compensated by whatever amount you have already agreed to when you make that offer, and you already agreed to that when you saw the property. See, there's 2 steps there. The seller can say yes, or they can say no. Now, as long as you're asking for a reasonable compensation, because especially if the property is being listed by like a Coldwell Banker or a Century 21, they are in the business of keeping commissions as high as possible. They're going to keep negotiating the same 5%, 6% commissions that they always did. Now, sellers are going to start probably looking at this and saying, well, I'm not sure if I want to go with those guys because they're more expensive and you don't really get that much different service. It's all the same marketing. It's all on the same MLS, and it's all the properties are selling for the same price. It doesn't matter what firm you're with. And that is true. That's how we get a lot of business over the years. We don't have the expenses, marketing expenses, advertising expenses that the big firms have. So that keeps our overhead low, and therefore we are allowed and able, through our own brokerage policy, to negotiate commissions. So all those things are gonna influence the negotiation of the buyer agent commission. And you have to remember there's a couple of steps here. The prospective buyer has to remember that early on, when they first see that property, when they first ask to see the property with an agent, that prospective buyer has to remember early on, or be at least aware that early on when they're signing that agreement with a buyer's agent for representation and for the payment of commission to that agent, that eventually that buyer is going to be obligated to pay whatever that amount is, whether the seller agrees to it or not. Most agreements are going to require that the commission be paid only upon closing. So let's say you're a buyer, you want to buy this house, you already signed your buyer representation agreement, you're on the hook now for 2.5%. Let's say the seller agrees to pay the 2.5%, the sale closes, then that 2.5% does not come out of pocket from the buyer, it comes out of the seller proceeds, and the buyer's agent gets paid. On the other hand, if you make an offer on that property and you get your offer accepted, but the seller does not agree to pay the buyer agent commission, you as a buyer are going to be on the hook for that maybe 2.5% commission out of pocket, possibly out of your mortgage. Maybe it's not out of pocket. Maybe your mortgage lender is able to figure that out. Now that's another good reason to work through our office. We can figure these kind of questions out early on to help you understand what kind of loan you have, whether you as a buyer's agent will be able to get your real estate agent paid out of your mortgage, whether the seller is going to pay for it. We can figure all that stuff out at an early stage. And that's why you work with a company like us, because others, they're not going to have this discussion with you early on. They're going to just assume that you're going to be willing to pay 2.5%. All they care about is you signing an agreement that you're going to pay 2.5%, 3%. They don't care where it comes from. That's usually true. That's the commission part of the agreement. A buyer representation agreement is going to have more than just a commission provision in the contract. It's also going to say, discuss some things about the scope of the agreement. Is this an agreement that's going to last for a term of time? For example, is this an agreement that's going to last for 1 year, 6 months, 1 month? Usually, even if you do have a term, a specific amount of time, that agreement will be terminated or concluded either on notice by the buyer or either party, or let's say it's a 1-year agreement and within 3 months you find a house, and then in 4 months you close on the house. Then once it closes, that agreement is over. So you can negotiate those terms as well. You can decide how long do you want this agreement to last. You can also decide that this agreement will only be valid for Ventura County properties, California properties, maybe only one property. So this is the next big point. If you're not sure if you want to hire this agent forever, or for if you're not sure that you want this agent to be your agent on, in searching for properties generally, but you're okay with the possibility of this agent being your agent for this one specific house that you're interested in, then you can specify that. You can say, yes, I'm signing this buyer representation agreement. Yes, I'm going to pay 2.5% to this agent if it closes, and only as to this specific condo or this specific house. So there is a spot that makes that really obvious in the buyer representation agreement. Most people, because they still have not decided which agent they're going to hire at this early stage when you're just getting started at looking at properties, most people are going to want to go with that, and our firm will volunteer that. We don't want to obligate you unnecessarily to looking at all kinds of properties. We'll be very willing to negotiate those terms with you if it's only one property you want to look at, or if you want to hire us for a period of time, then you're welcome to do that as well. We will try to inform you so that you can make that informed decision as to the terms of this buyer representation agreement. That's it in a nutshell. There's probably more to say about this, and I probably will come back and say some more about it because the industry is going to change. People's practices, customs, agents' practices and customs are going to change, and buyers are going to probably assert their preferences, and that's going to influence the business. I think prospective buyers are going to be hesitant as usual to signing agreements. They always have been, and that's reasonable. So I think the agents who know that they have some value, they know what they're offering their clients, and they also know how to take a consultative approach with their clients like we train our agents on. We're going to help you be informed. We're going to help you understand that this agreement is negotiable, and the long-term effects of this agreement, and why you would want certain terms over others. We'll do our best to sell you, but we're not going to do a crazy hard sales approach. We will try to give you the right service the way you want it and on reasonable terms. So if you have any questions about this, let's talk about the buyer representation agreement, especially if you were starting to look at property for purchase in California. Chuck at fund2000.com, CHUCK at FUND2000.com. And I look forward to hearing from you. Have a good one.